Hey guys, so I have come to believe that the biggest two culprits of upper back and neck pain are the rhomboids and the levator scapula. And today I want to talk about the levator scapula and why I think this is so. I don't think this is news to anybody, but it's one of those things for me that has just revealed itself over and over and over again. So as much as I like working on the rhomboids, I like working on the levator scapula equally as much, because I think it really resolves a lot of issues. So once I've warmed up the neck and the shoulders and come all the way up to the base of the skull, I want to turn my client's head to the side and ensure that I bring my client's awareness to the levator scapula. I want to isolate it away from the traps. So I want to make sure that I'm pulling the traps away either from the posterior aspect like I'm doing here, or from the anterior aspect. I can push the traps down and I can really hit that superior angle of the scapula on either side. And then I want to come up to the side of the neck and make sure that I'm clear about the work I'm about to do. I'm going to start my work right into the insertion of this muscle, right at the superior angle of the scapula. And the first thing I want to do is sink into that tissue, down to that insertion. And as I'm compressing, rotate my client's head back to that same side, so in this instance rotating her head to the left, and that's going to shorten that muscle and soften that pull on that insertion. So as I'm working there, that whole muscle can start to loosen up just a little bit. This area, the superior angle of the scapula, is a veritable meeting of the minds for muscle pain and muscle tension. So I want to repeat this coming from the posterior aspect of this bony landmark, and then I can also do it from the anterior portion as well, pushing the traps aside. I absent-mindedly didn't show the anterior work here, but you get the idea. I'm throwing in a basic technique here, so if you don't want to see it, go ahead and skip ahead. But I'm just using a soft fist to kind of push down into the insertion and into the meat of the levator scapula as I use my right hand under my client's head to stabilize the head and pull the head away, giving the levator scapula a nice deep stretch. Moving on to the origin of this lovely muscle, I want to sink into each of the transverse processes, starting inferiorly at the base of the neck and then working superiorly, God, those words are hard to say, towards the base of the skull. My technique here is to sink into the transverse process as I rotate the head towards the hand that I'm working on. So in this case, I'm sinking in with my left hand and moving my client's head to the left as I sink in, and then slowly repeating that process as I move up each of the transverse processes all the way up and allowing those attachments to soften as I compress in. I can repeat this process a few times, but my focus each time I work up the cervical spine is to move slightly into different areas around those transverse processes. So just like the attachment on the superior angle of the scapula, those tiny little bony landmarks of those transverse processes have an anterior and a lateral and a posterior side. So trying to affect each of those aspects so that my work feels really complete. I'm just using a light friction here to soften up the deeper work that I've just done, and I want to make sure that I'm crossing over where the neck meets the shoulder and also over the base of the skull into the head, so that the whole area feels connected and all the connective tissue that then wraps around the skull finds some relief. This next move that I'm doing is a little more advanced and I believe requires some grace and fluidity. So tap into that dancer inside of yourself and think about using both your hands in a very rhythmic way. I'm sinking in with my right hand underneath my client's cervical spine, using my palm to push away from me and using my fingertips to then pull towards me. And with my left hand, I'm just guiding my client's head in the opposite direction of my right hand. So as I pull the neck toward me, I'm using my other hand to push the forehead away from me, and vice versa. As I pull the neck toward me, I'm using my hand to push the client's head away from me. This oppositional repetitive movement really engages the parasympathetic nervous system, and it can feel really good, but make sure that you are gentle and stay in communication with your client. I want to do a little more work with the insertion of the levator scapula, and because this muscle elevates the scapula, I want to play around with that movement. So I'm using my left hand to hook into the humerus and push the humerus up, which is going to elevate the scapula, and as I do that, that superior angle is going to pop up for me. I can do the work that I want to do, and then as I pull the humerus down and the shoulder down away from the neck, I can then lengthen out the work that I've just done. So I'm repeating it here, pushing up with my left hand, using my right hand to apply a deep friction here underneath the traps, make sure I'm on that superior angle, and then when I'm done, I pull the shoulder away. I use my left hand to pull the arm down and lengthen out that space between the shoulder and the neck and really let that levator scapula release. Another layer of this technique is to influence the inferior angle of the scapula as opposed to the humerus. So just for demonstration purposes, I'm turning my client over to the side and showing you what I'm going to do underneath my client's back. So I'm using my left hand to push the inferior border up so that I can really sink into that superior angle and do the same work on a slightly deeper level. With my client's arm back on the table in the supine position, I've got my left hand underneath her scapula and I can push the scapula up. And when I do that, that attachment to the levator scapula really pops out. And this can feel so relieving. As I push the scapula up and I really press into the levator scapula attachment site, I'm frictioning out, compressing in, and I'm releasing some trigger points and I'm releasing a lot of adhesions, and I'm allowing this really movable bone attached to these really movable joints of the shoulder and the neck to release and relax, and kind of resetting the fibers of these muscles to remember what they're supposed to do. Remembering that this bony landmark is three-dimensional, I don't just want to attack the posterior side. I want to make sure that I'm getting that anterior side as well. So as I lift her whole shoulder up, I can really isolate the traps more superficially. And then when I do that, I'm able to sink my thumb down on the anterior aspect of the traps and then sinking deep to that into the anterior aspect of the superior angle. So what I'm doing here is relaxing different attachment sites, different fibers of this muscle, and what I've noticed throughout all of my work is that there are sometimes some clients who have the majority of their tension on the posterior side or on the anterior side, or sometimes it moves around, so I really make sure that I address the whole thing and that this whole shoulder can relax and that that tension going up into the head and neck can disappear. For this last technique, I'm going to stay on the side of the table working with my client's shoulder, pulling their shoulder away from their head and neck. And as I do that, I'm going to do some slow, deep sliding friction up through the entire belly of the levator scapula and really sinking into its origin. And as I do that, I can either have my client's head start in a neutral position or have my client's head turn to the right like I do here. And then what I want to do is ask them to turn their head towards me, kind of like we did before, but this time I'm applying that stretch into the insertion. So this muscle's getting a deeper stretch, some deeper work, and some deeper release. What I really like about this work is that it's a combination of deep myofascial release with some deep compression or even deep trigger point therapy if you find a trigger point in there. And I find that when I combine those two techniques, I'm working not only with the connective tissue, but also with the muscle tissue. And it's so important to be able to access the different tissues and the different layers of tissues every time we're working anywhere. Once I feel like I've gotten a nice change in the deep structures of the levator scapula, I want to do a nice active release technique. I can do this before I start my work, but I also like to do it afterwards, so I'm demonstrating it here. So all I'm doing here is applying pressure or resistance on her shoulders and then asking her to take a deep breath in, and at the same time shrugging her shoulders up to her ears, and then when she exhales she lets go of not only her breath but her shoulders, and I push down, really lengthening out that levator scapula and all the muscles of the head and neck. Thanks for watching, guys. I've got some bonus techniques in the side lying position, of course, for this muscle, so keep an eye out for that. And I've also got some surprise videos coming up. I'm working on a new project and I'm really excited about it, so keep your eyes peeled. And of course, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them in the comments below.